It's all about us on so many levels, but God really wants us to focus on Him to make it all about Him. And so I hope that that's what you're trying to do tonight as He has just been working in your hearts by His Spirit. So Philippians chapter 2. Philippians chapter 2, I want to continue on where we left off last week. And let me read for you verse 5 to verse 11 of Philippians chapter 2. And it says this: your attitude, your disposition, your mindset, your attitude should be the same as that of Christ Jesus. Now, we could stop there and talk about that all night. But Paul continues to talk a little bit about what that attitude should be like, what that mindset should be like as we focus on Jesus. It says this: who, talking about Jesus, who being in the very nature God, did not consider equality with God something to be grasped, but made himself nothing, taking the very nature of a servant, being made in human likeness, and being found in appearance as a man, he humbled himself, and he became obedient to death, even death on a cross. Therefore, because of that, because of Jesus' humiliation, because of His death, God exalted Him to the highest place and gave Him the name that is above every name. Yes, even above your name. And above Prince George's name. All that hype all this past week about Prince George. Cute little baby, but Jesus' name is greater. And He's greater. And gave Him the name that is above every name, that at the name of Jesus every knee should bow in heaven and on earth and under the earth, and every tongue confess that Jesus Christ is Lord, to the glory of God the Father. So where are we at? As we consider this book of Philippians, where are we at? Paul's in jail. He's in Rome. And he is writing to Christians in this little city called Philippi. He's really encouraged by them. He actually loves them. They're very dear to his heart. They have encouraged him in so many different ways while he's in prison. While people were rushing out the front door or the back door, the people, the followers of Jesus in Philippi were coming in the front door with gifts and encouragement and saying, Paul, we're still behind you. We still love you. Keep going, Paul. They actually sent Epaphroditus, one of the servants of the church of Philippi, to him just to bring somebody alongside of him, just to have flesh next to him and say, look, we love you, keep going. And so Paul's in prison. But we're also learning some of the context of why Paul is writing this letter is because false teachers are coming in. They're trying to trap people. They're trying to teach false doctrine. And so Paul is trying to deal with these false teachers. He's trying to help these believers to stay on track. But also there's dissension within the ranks of the church. You'll read it later on in the book of Philippi. There are a few that are really having some disagreement about some stuff, and it's becoming so great that Paul has to deal with it, and he wants unity among the body. And so that's kind of where we're at as we come to chapter 2, as we start looking at the lens of serving others. Now, last Saturday, I shared this statement in my message. There was a number of statements, but one of the statements that I shared was this: there can be no joy. We're talking about joy on the journey, right? For so many people, they're just trying to survive, just getting from this part, this place to this place, just, from this valley to this valley or whatever. And people are just trying to survive. And I'm saying this, that the Christian life, even though it's abundant, it can be like this at times, right? You've all experienced that. There can still be peace, contentment, and satisfaction, and that's what biblical joy is. There can still be joy in my life, even though the abundant life can be like this. The only constant in the abundant life is Jesus Christ. He's the same all the way through. And so, in the trial, in the hardship, Jesus is my focus, and there can still be joy, satisfaction, and peace even in the midst of hardship. And this is what Paul is talking about. He wants these believers to know joy. And so the statement that I shared last week, one of the statements is this: there can be no joy in the life of a follower of Jesus or a Christian who puts himself or herself above others. Let me say it one more time. there can be no joy in the life of a follower of Christ who puts himself or herself above others. Now, the tragedy of that statement is we as believers in Christ, himself or herself, if you're a him or a her today and you're a follower of Jesus, many of us on different levels and at different times have put ourselves way above the needs and the cares and the love of other people. Let me begin with this story. I've been reading this book called The Unchurched Next Door, talking about how we reach out to people who are unchurched and don't know Jesus. It's a phenomenal book. They're talking a little bit about kind of a survey that they do here, and I won't get into all that. But let me read this, because I believe this story really helps us understand a little bit more about that statement, there can be no joy in the life of a Christian who puts himself or herself above others. It says this, very few writings on the unchurched have ignored the importance of relationships in reaching lost friends, neighbors, co-workers, relatives, and acquaintances. Indeed, this writer says in my previous book, the research team that he works with noted the critical importance of Christians connecting with non-Christians. Let me ask you this question. Do you have non-Christian friends in your life? You should. I hope you do as a follower of Christ. You need to. And this writer says, the research team, it's critical, important that Christians connect with non-Christians. And then he goes on, the formerly unchurched encouraged us. Now this research that they did is they talked to many people who weren't followers of Christ yet, and they were unchurched, but then they came to know Christ, they became church, and they asked them some questions about how does the church, how do followers of Christ reach out to the unchurched? And so this is what he's talking about here. And so he says the formerly unchurched encouraged us to ask the unchurched specific questions regarding relationships. So on their advice, we asked the unchurched who influenced their lives. We also asked them whether any Christians had been an influence in their lives. Then we asked specific questions about negative and positive influences. These new Christians were particularly enthusiastic about their study. You know what I see on this scale more than anything, this lady said, I see where relationships make all the difference. You know what moved me, this lady said, what moved me to open myself to church and to faith was a lady by the name Brenda. She was my coworker, and she later became my best friend. And this is what she says about Brenda. I knew she was a Christian, but she didn't shove her beliefs down my throat. Instead, she was always there when I needed her. I remember one time when I asked why she always looked after me, and she said quietly, because I am a Christian. And for 4 years, she just put me first. This lady continued on to say, once I started going to church, things moved pretty quickly. She said, I accepted Christ, and when I told Brenda, you should have seen her, she smiled and hugged me, and then the tears came for both of us. She said she had prayed for every day since we met. Can you believe that? Every day. And then a pause on the other end of the telephone was lengthy by telephone standards. And I thought I heard a soft sobbing sound. Then this lady told me the news. She said, Brenda died of cancer last month. I met at the funeral, I bet, a dozen women that she had befriended. And every one of them said that Brenda was the reason they accepted Christ. Yeah, I really believe relationships are important. Now, I share that story with you because it's a fantastic story. When I read it, I was thrilled with this story. But what caught me was what Lorena said about Brenda. This is what she said. She said, for 4 years, she just put me first. Lorena was unsaved, unchurched. Brenda was a Christian, prayed for her, had others pray for her. And she said, for 4 years, this lady loved me, cared for me, and put me first. Others. Did you hear one of the stories that made national news this week? What was it, Warren? No. Tim Hortons? Coffee? Did you hear that one? Okay, this is a cup of coffee. All right, nothing else, just a cup of coffee. All right. Someone out west, I guess, gave a lot of money to Tim Hortons one day, and I think it had happened a couple other times in different places, and gave this money to the manager and said, use this money to buy everyone whatever they wanted until it ran out. An incredible story. I wish I was one of those people in line that day. But what caught my attention was this, that this made national news from coast to coast. I mean, that was pretty cool, but I wondered why it would make such a noise like it did. And I think it was because of this. Because things like this are really rare. Now, thinking about others in such a big way like this doesn't happen very often. People were overwhelmed. Statements like, this made my day. What do you mean? Somebody buying you a cup of coffee made your day? Yeah. Somebody thought about me enough to give money to this store manager to buy coffee for hundreds of people. And one of the statements was, this made my day. And somebody else said this, I've never had that happen to me. And these were consistent statements over and over and over again as people went in to buy a cup of coffee and they said, you don't have to pay today. Why? Well, somebody else came in. They came in with a lot of money and they bought coffee for all kinds of people. That never happened to me before. Never had that happen to me before. Made my day. You know, people were incredibly happy and it made people feel good that day. I want you to watch this video as you consider what I've just shared.
I am holding half an acre, torn from the map of Michigan, and folded in this scrap of paper is a land I grew. Think of every town you've lived in, every room you lay your head, and what is it that you remember? Do you carry every sadness with you? Every hour your heart was broken, every night the fear and darkness lay down with you.
I liked that video when I saw it as well. I hope it spurs you on to help somebody else. But would you look at the text again? Because in Philippians chapter 2 now, in verse 3 and 4, I touched on these verses last week. I think verse 4 sums this video up. Actually, verse 3, the end of it also as well. It says this, the end of verse 3, look at it. It says, but in humility consider others better than yourselves. Each of you should look not only to your own interest, but also to the interests of others. The end of verse 3 states we should consider others better than ourselves. In verse 4, it states that we should look also to the interest of others. Now, as I was looking at this, what I found interesting, verses 3 and 4, it gives us really a balance of what it means to help others. You know, some would say that as followers of Jesus, we shouldn't have interests or we really shouldn't enjoy things. Well, I simply don't agree with that. if you look closely, Paul is saying this, that we should look not only to our own interests, but the interest of others. There's a contrast word, and that contrast word is but there. Not only. Listen, it's okay as a follower of Jesus to have interests, isn't it? It's okay to have enjoyments. It's okay to focus on things that bring happiness to my life or to other lives. However, the key thought that Paul is trying to get across here is this, that it shouldn't consume us. It shouldn't just be all about us and my interests. We need to put in just as much energy and commitment to considering others and looking at the interests of others. Paul says, he uses some interesting words in these verses. He says, he uses the word consider. You see that there? And he also uses the word look. And these are two good words found in verses 3 and 4. And from a quick view, it may seem that all Paul is saying here is just take a quick glance. Or just give a little bit of thought. And that's what it looks like here when he says, I want you to look at the needs of others, or I want you to consider the needs of others. You know, there have been times when I have given a quick look at something. How about you? Just a quick look. It was so quick that I really wasn't able to observe things. Just let me give you an illustration. Sometimes Bonnie asks me to look at something. And to be very honest, I really didn't want to. But she asked me. I was kind of busy doing something, or I was in my own world. And so I did. There was a quick look, and it was quick, and I really didn't observe anything. And if she would have asked me to describe something or what I thought about what I saw, there would be really no way for me to actually tell her what I saw because it was a quick look. And there have been times when I have considered something, but it was a quick consideration. I gave it some time, but really it wasn't interesting, and so I moved on. Have you ever done that? A quick consideration or a quick look? Well, this is not the idea here that Paul's trying to share with us. When Paul writes to these Christians and he says, I want you to look at the needs of others, and I want you to consider others better than yourself, he's asking them to do more than just give it a passing glance or a thought. The idea here is to observe. I want you to get this. The idea here is to observe. Think about it deeply and intimately. Put some effort into it. As Lenora, in that story I read to you, said about Brenda, she said, for 4 years, she just put me first. That's the idea. As Paul focuses on what brings joy to our lives, he's looking through the lens of serving others. Remember, he wants them to fulfill his joy in verse 2. And he says, if you want joy, if you want true satisfaction in your life, he says, serve others. And really, you know what? It's not an option for the follower of Jesus. And I'm not just talking about serving in ministries here at this church or in our ministry. I'm talking about it's not an option for the follower of Christ. We need to serve others. He says, I want you to take a deep look and consider thoughtfully the interest and the needs of others. And so to illustrate this point, he begins to share about the life of Jesus in verses 5 and to verse 11, which I read for you. And I concluded last week by stating that Jesus illustrates 4 characteristics of one who serves others. And I'm not going to look at all 4, just a couple of them because of time. And so if we are, as followers of Jesus, to consider and look at others, to serve and help them, we need to see how Jesus did it. Verse 5, as I've already read for you, we are to have the same attitude and the same mindset of Jesus. So I've got to ask you this question, follower of Jesus. Do you have, or are you working on, are you developing the same attitude, mindset, outlook that Jesus has? It's described here in verses 6 to 11. We are going to understand a little bit more about the outlook or the attitude of Jesus as it related to him and us serving. The first thing is this, and you see it in verses 5 and 6. The first characteristic of Jesus serving is this, that he thinks of others and not himself. We say, well, yeah, I know that about Jesus. That's pretty obvious. But I want to show you in the text just how important that was to Jesus, and how important that is to God, and how important it needs to be for you, follower of Jesus, that we think of others, not ourselves primarily. One of the things in verse 5 and 6, one of the things that Paul does here is Paul is now taking us backwards, sort of speaking. At least in our human minds, he's taking us backwards. He takes us back to eternity past here. Eternity past. Now, you know as well as I do, eternity has no time, right? And we really can't fully understand eternity. It has no time, beginning or end. But for us to simply understand Paul taking us back in time to consider who Jesus is, he takes us back in realm and for us in time to explain something to us, that Jesus Christ is God. So one of the main things he's trying to get across to these Philippian believers is this: Jesus, who is God, he is a servant. Jesus is God. He's trying to get that point across. In verse 6, it says this: who, Jesus, being in the very nature God. Actually, the word nature means this. It means form. If you have another version, King James uses the word, the very form of God. The word form here means this. It means the outward expression of the inward nature. Now let me say that one more time. When Paul says that Jesus, being in the very form of God, or the very nature of God, is saying this, that Jesus, we see the outward expression of his inward nature. Now, let me try to explain this as best I can. Have you ever watched alien movies, sci-fi movies? All right? You're going to say, well, how that connects. How many like sci-fi? Good. Come back to my house tonight. We'll watch a couple of alien movies, all right? But I remember a few years back, and I think they did a remake just recently, where aliens take on human form. A sitcom a few years ago simply called V. How many watched that? V. Remember that? V? Yeah. The story, I didn't watch all of it, but I think the story was about aliens that came to Earth to conquer it and to get rid of humanity. Well, when we as viewers are introduced to these aliens, they are just like us in the sense of their outward look. They look human. They have flesh. Their form or their outward expression was human, and they looked really nice on the outside, and they were really friendly, and they said that they wanted to come in peace. But hidden beneath this form, hidden beneath the look of being human, their real nature dwelt. It wasn't revealed at first. Their outward expression did not match the inward reality of the fact that they were aliens. Now, how does this apply to Jesus? Let me try. Stay with me, all right? Stay with me. Simply this: when Jesus came, even though he took the form of a human, his nature remained intact. And he didn't hide who he was. He came in the form of God. His very nature was the same. His nature didn't change. But his outward form did. Inwardly, he was all God. And outside, he looked and was human. But that's not the main point of this text here. The main point is this: that Jesus, who came as a human, was still God when he came to earth. And it says this about him, that he did not consider equality with God something to be grasped. Or in other words, he didn't feel that he needed to try to selfishly prove that he was God. He didn't need to try to selfishly prove that he was equal to God, or play that card, so to speak, or hold on to that tightly, or be stressed about the fact that people didn't believe that he was God. His attitude was, I'm here not for my sake, but I'm here for others. He didn't come to keep his privileges as God for himself, or his attributes as God for himself, to show how powerful and how good he was. And even though he did that, even though he showed how good he was, and even though he showed how powerful he was, he wanted to use those privileges and those attributes not for himself, not to try to grasp onto this equality. People need to know this, people gotta, and stress out about it. But he used his privileges and his attitudes as God for others. And that's the main point here that Paul is trying to stress. That he, who? Jesus, being in the form, the nature of God, he didn't grasp or try to stress out about his equality with God, because he was God. He was God. And he came to do something that no one else could do. Listen, Jesus was thinking of others. And that's what Paul is trying to get us to understand, not himself. So how does that translate or apply to me as a follower of Jesus? Well, simply this. 20 times in the New Testament, we're instructed to live with one another. And here are just a